Good morning, everyone. So we're going to make this little basket today. The first thing I'm going to start with is showing you the essential tools to make this basket comfortable. The first one is being some finger protection. You're going to be drawing a lot of 28 wire and you're going to be coiling this entire thing for hours, to be truthful. And so eventually a blister is going to develop somewhere on your fingers. So you can get some of this, or you can get some bandages just to help you with the blister that's going to develop. The other essential tool I want to introduce you to is this map pin. If you don't have one of these, you can get a little needle, but something not like a tack. That needle point is a little too wide. So you need one of these stick pins, map pins, or you need a needle, and that is for breaking through these coils so that we can tie into the previous coils. I hope that makes sense. It will when we get started. So without this guy, the whole thing is miserable and probably something I wouldn't even try. So I would definitely have this on hand. This is an essential tool you'll use throughout the entire thing to make it comfortable and enjoyable. And we'll start with some basic round nose pliers. You can keep some chain nose pliers on hand in case you need to tap a thing or two, and you can keep your flush cutters on hand so that we can continually cut more 28 gauge. This is a lot of wire. It's probably in the tens of feet in footages. I'm going to work 3 feet at a time so that I don't have too many ties going through here. You can work 2 feet, 3 feet, 6 feet, however many feet you want at a time, and I'll show you how to add wire as we coil around this whole thing. All right, so we'll start with our 18 gauge, and I'll show you how to begin the very center. We're going to work from the center out. That little turn is probably just barely 2 millimeters. It's barely the top of your round nose pliers. I make a little mark right there on my plier so that I can make this evenly each time. And I'll just grip the very end of it, and I'm just going to make a nice little turn. Doesn't have to be perfect, but it should be round. When the end of the wire and the length of the wire collide, you're going to give it a little more space, just barely, and come around again. We continually need this breadth of space as we develop this coil, as we work throughout the project. And we will continually be wrapping onto the coil with the 28 gauge. And so you'll have to flick your 28 gauge over this. It's going to be hard for me to show you under the camera, but I normally work this not at the table, just on the chair so that I can flick my long wire. I keep the end of this 24 inches of 18 gauge kind of propped on the table that's a couple of feet away from me, just barely there, so that I can work and have something to brace on. Otherwise, you know, this is hard to hold until the coil develops and this length gets shorter. It's particularly hard when it's this small. So this will be the only uncomfortable part, is getting the basket started. But that's how you can start it. Make that little loop. And again, that's about 2 millimeter in diameter on this 18 gauge. Then I'll come down to the opposite end. I'm going to cut off of my spool of 28 gauge about 3 feet. I like to work with about 3 feet at a time. And the easiest way to start this small coil is actually from the opposite end. So I'll just manage this 3 feet of 28 gauge down at my side here and let it come up. And I'll manage the very long end of my wire just by letting it fall forward on my table. I'm going to take the end of my 18 gauge and one of the ends of my 28 gauge here. I like to wrap overhand, so I'm going to approach it from the bottom. It's easier to start this long wrap at this end, and then the rest of the time we're going to have to work deep in the coil. Okay, so we'll make 52 wraps around here. The shorter you go, the easier it is just to wrap overhand. And you'll just count your wraps, and you'll make them side by side. And after about 20 or so, you'll just push them back against each other until you have 52 of them. I don't even know how many I just did, maybe 8. So I'll go 9, 10, 12, 13, 14, 15, 20, and I'll just push that back against itself. I'll scooch, give myself a little more room. 2, 3. That's 40. And I'm going to scooch my camera so that you can see this a little bit better. Hopefully you can see that. So I have 40 of them. And now I'm going to go for another 12. It doesn't have to be exact. It's about 52 of them. And now we're just going to slide it all the way down. Just hang on to it and slide all the way down to your loop. And get nestled right in there the best that you can. Let me change this a little bit more so you can see it. And you're just going to nest right in there. This is going to be the most difficult part of the coil, is getting this little bit wrapped up, coiled up. You want to keep just a breath of a space in between, just like you're weaving, just about the same space as if you were doing a traditional weave. And we'll keep that space throughout the entire coil as it develops. You handle your plier however is comfortable for you. I'm trying to do it underneath the camera, so I might be at a little bit of an odd angle. But to get this first turn, I slide my small coil down, I reinsert my round nose plier, and I just turn. And again, you just want to leave a breath of a space. You might need to go to the small part. And you don't want this space to be too big, just barely there. Enough for you to get the wire between. Okay, so I'm going to make a few more and get my coil so that it meets this coil. So maybe if you're watching this ahead, instead of 52, you might have done 60 or 63 of these. And the coils are going to separate as we work, and that's okay. Just push them back together a little bit. So you're about here. I'm going to make a few more overhanded coils. And again, if I were not up against this table, I would just be flinging this long wire overhanded. But because I have this table and this camera between my work, I'm just going to carefully make these coils. This is definitely a project of patience. And I'm just going to continue overhand until I can get a nice 360 of coils right about here, maybe 2 more. It's always good to pre-turn a little bit so that you know where you're going. We can always make adjustments, so don't let any of this freak you out. It's only uncomfortable in this small area. After about 3 of them, it goes real easy, okay? So I'll just go overhand and make a few more coils. I'm making sure my small wire stays as clean and unkinked as possible as I work. I'm working with my right-handed coil, so it's easy to keep the coil going this way, and I just pass over an open space. There's nothing in my way, and all I have to do is manage this wire as it climbs over. When I get about right here and I can go jump into that and lock into that previous coil, I'm going to do that. And again, I'm just trying to manage my long wire here on the table. So I'll just turn it a little bit more. And because this is the first one, I'm going to go through twice. This is probably the hardest part of it. You want to dive through. You're going to have to dive through on every one of them. And you're just working to keep your loop here nice and clean as it passes through. You're looking to direct the wire down. And as I pull it close, I only want that hair of a space between these two coiled wires. And because this is the first one, I'm going to go through here a couple of times. And I'm going to land the second one right next to it. I like to get it close and make sure it's in place and then pull it tight. Okay, so now I've got a nice little starting coil right there with 2 wraps. I'm going to come over my wire and I'm going to wrap this. I'm going to put my pin somewhere where it doesn't get out of my way, or it doesn't get in my way but I don't lose it. So I just keep it on a little piece of plastic. I keep it stuck on a little piece of plastic over here on the edge because you're going to need it a lot. So there's one. I have this little beginning fragment. I can take that off, or I can save it in case I want to put a bead ball or something there later for that hole. Okay, so there's 1, 2, I'm pushing each one back. I'm keeping them side by side. 3, 4, 5. My goal is to make it to that first open crevice so that I can tie in. That might be 12, that might be 15. Okay, I don't so much go by count. In these first ones I do to try to keep them even, but then we just do like a bricklayer and go in between them. So since my beginning crossover is here, I kind of want the other one here, and then I'll make a split here, and I'll make a split here. But depending on how big you get this hole, yours might be 16. Mine might be 16. So is that 2, 4, 6, 8, 9, 10, 11. You definitely want to make sure the long wire is propped up against something, otherwise your hand is going to stress right here holding this little bit for a long time. And I'm going to turn to see how far I am on the coil. Just going to do a little pre-turn. I'm not pushing, I'm not pulling. I'm just turning the wire in. And I'm trying to keep this as round, as I can. I have a few more because I need to make it to here for my second attachment. So I'll just keep wrapping. And I pull this 28 gauge all the way around each time. I don't do any double loops because then it starts to kink on itself. So there goes 25. And again, the count's not really important so long as you make it to the other side. I'm going to pre-bend a little bit. I'm kind of rolling this one forward as well as bending this one up a little bit. And I'm working just to keep that tiny little space there. Okay, so I got a few more to reach my 180 mark. And then now I'm going to turn a little bit closer. The turn is what's important. I'll go a couple more and then I'll dive in there about the 180 mark. It's okay if the coils on your 28 gauge weaving wire separate a little bit around the bends. That's normal. So don't fret that. Just work to keep them side by side. Work to keep the tension so that there's no bubbles and that your wraps are as consistent as you can get them. And work to keep your long weaving wire unkinked. It'll start to be important once we start to tie in. So right about here, about the 180 mark, I'm going to push my coils back. I'm going to make sure that I turn my wire a little bit so that I have a straight dive. I'm not trying to get in there at a slant because this length is too far away. So I'm going to turn so that I have a nice straight dive in there. This one I could probably get through without the needle, but as I continue to weave, it's going to be really important to use the needle to make a little space in between the previous coil and your next wrap over them, over two of them. So I just made a little space. You're making a space, but you're also causing a slight separation in the coils on the previous wrap so that you can try to get in there. Just slow down right here, and you see how it's snapped in to the line of coils previous to it. I'm going to just scrape to make sure there's no bubble on this side. I'm going to make sure that I'm not too close, but that I still have that consistent little space. And I'm going to get right on its edge. I'm holding it from underneath, and I'm going to make enough single wraps to get me to the quarter mark right here. And that might be about 15, 16 of them. So if you're scraping right here as you come through, you need to be a little further away. If you keep scraping the wire, they don't land next to each other, and then sometimes it breaks because it puts a lot of tension on your wire. So that spacing is quite important, and we can adjust it as we work. Don't let it frustrate you. This is probably no different than traditional weaving with multiple wires on strips, like we do our other pendants. It's one repetitious motion of overhand coiling throughout the entire thing. And all you're making sure of, since we started this, 180 to 180, and then we're going to do a quarter and a quarter. So the next time we come around, we're going to come between those. And we're just going to do them like bricks. We don't even have to count once we get this first circle going. If they separate a little bit, you push them back every now and again. I still got a little ways to go to get me right here. going to eyeball it, and I'm also going to roll into it a little more. I'm keeping a little bit of a bow on, a bowing action on the wire here as I come around. Try to not make any drastic moves and just try to keep it nice and round. It gets easier once the coil gets a little bigger. So I'll make a few more, and then since here's my 180 and my 180, my next cross into these two will be right about here. So I'll make one more, maybe two more wraps and get myself lined up. And again, right here, it's probably big enough that I don't need my needle yet. My needle is going to come in handy when I'm trying to break through this layer where it's coil on coil. It's a little easier right now because I have that inside is bare, so I have some more space. So I'm just going to take and pass through, keeping with my overhanded motion. I'm going to make sure my wire comes through cleanly. I'm going to make sure that it lands right next to the previous coil before I pull it tight. And then I'm just going to jiggle a little bit and lock down into the coil previous to it, to the coil above it. I'll scrape a little bit. That looks good. I'll hold it so that there's no bubble. I'll make that, whoop, little earthquake there, sorry. I'll make that first wrap and make sure to get in there. And then I'll wrap until I get to here. So some of them go longer, some of them go shorter. I could just do another double right here just to make these 4/4 even, and I might do that. You want to keep the wraps that the double wraps when you secure to the previous wrapper, the previous length of coil. You want to make sure that you're not doing too far because then the whole thing doesn't stay together. So it's a matter of setting yourself up here so that you've got some even quarters around this first one that goes out. And then you just kind of keep it that way until you get your main coil for the lid done. You don't want those separations too far because then when you push back, you can get inconsistent coils. So they don't have to be, as you're working them, they don't have to be exactly side by side. You can make a few and then push them all back. So right about here, I'll start turning. So again, I'm working my left hand and turning slightly while I also kind of bow and control the wire, the leading wire over here. I'm working to just keep that little space. And I'm going to try to dive in just to the right of this first thing. So I've got some even quarters. I'll do my next one right about here. So I'll come around right about here. I think I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this leading wire just so it isn't confusing for us. On these, we're not going to cut them. We're going to spin and break them. So you always want to leave enough that you can grab, maybe an inch. And you just keep tension. You're making sure that you're spinning it right down there. And you're just making some wide circles. Don't pull your design out, but just make wide circles until it breaks off. Okay, then there's nothing there to try to cut and tuck. Okay, so I'm going to turn my coil back in this direction. I'm going to make a few more to get a little closer to that space. And this goes pretty fast after you get yourself set up with the first 1 or 2 rounds here. If the space is too wide, I can pull back slightly and come forward again slightly. That's about right. I'm going to go a couple more just to get into that empty space right there. Get aligned with that empty space, I should say. And now the needle is going to be essential. There's going to be no way that I can just push this thin wire, the tip of it, through here without making a space. So I'm going to align my needle. I'm going to make sure that I do not impale myself, and I'm just going to jiggle carefully and wiggle back and forth to pry a little space. Just go up and down to make a little hole. It parts the weave right there so you can get in, and then you want to align it kind of with your next coil. So it doesn't have to be exact. I'm just trying to show you exact. Ooh, I don't know what was at the end of that thing. Some type of agent. So right there, I broke through. I'm going to get the end of my wire. You're going to make sure that thing is straight so you can scrape it with your fingernail if you need to. If it's all wrinkled, it'll make it difficult. So then you literally just go through, catch it on the other side. It's like a little rail for you. Don't tighten it until you make sure you're in place. You want to make sure you're not overlapping the previous coil, and then you can pull it tight. Not so tight that you're killing it, not so tight that you're killing the space, but just tight enough that there's no bubbles. You can scrape that little bit, hold everything from underneath, and make that first coil and lock it in. So now I'll make coils until I reach this spot, and I'll continue. Then this spot, and etc. And I'll just go in between them. Okay, so here we go again for some more single coils. It's a real easy technique, but it's very tedious. So you can get a lot of these, started in smaller versions if you want. You don't have to make it as large as I'm making this one, and it's not that large. It's a 1 1/4 inch diameter basket. So just know going in that, this is very repetitious, but it gets very addicting, and it goes pretty fast once you get the pattern and the rhythm going on, and you stop fearing whether or not there's going to be any mistakes. This is a very forgiving technique. So long as you have your little needle and you can lock these things in like a bricklayer, at every quarter or between, it becomes, sometimes you split them 2 times because the coil gets bigger. And you'll see that as we go along. But you're just keeping that in mind. You're trying to just keep in between each of these crossovers to keep it as neat as you can. And then I'll show us how to add wire. I'm almost done with my 3 feet of wire here. I've probably got, I say almost done, there's probably 10 inches left, but that's going to go quick. So right about here, I'm going to start to turn into the coil again. And I'm working to make this round. Certainly we could make this any shape we want. And between this one and this one is here. So that's where I'm going to pass through, is right there. So I'll get my little needle. I'll come right in here and make sure that I've got a gap big enough to get through there. I'll make sure the end of my weaving wire is straight. And I'll pass through that little crevice, making sure that I don't kink. And before I go making it super tight, I'm going to make sure I'm to the right hand side of the previous coil. I'm going to make sure that I'm as perpendicular or as straight as I can be, that I'm not too slanted, and then I'm going to lock in. If you're at a slant, it's a little harder to lock into that coil. And I don't worry about that little gap, because you can just fingernail like cards, kind of even it out a little bit. Okay? Hold everything, get your bubble out if you have one. Make sure you're lined up right for your next one. Go over and push down. Okay? Then I'm going to make a few more, and I'm going to go to here this time, a little bit longer run. I could also just go to here and keep, doing quarters, but I like to go like a bricklayer to make sure that this whole thing stays together. It gives you little gaps to add things to the cap later if you want to too. Okay, and I'm going to take my bend now and see how close I am to this spot. And I'm just maintaining that little space. So I have a little more ways to go to get to here. And I've only got a couple of inches left, a few inches left here of my weaving wire. So I'll have to start new wire soon. So I want to be between this one and this one, so about right here. So maybe one or two more. Now I'll get my little needle out. And I'm just going to be concerned with being in the middle of this one and this one. So right about here and being right here above my wrap. Going to break through. Just going to jiggle these until they part. Get a little closer. And you can work your wire down to whatever length is comfortable for you. I'm going to make this catch and then a couple of wraps, and then I'm probably going to start new wire. So I'm making sure I'm right where I need to be, and then I'll pull it tight. Going to maintain my little space right there. Hold it. come through a couple of times. And then I'm going to start new wire. I could probably go more, but just for the sake of comfort, I'll show you. So I start a couple, I'll do maybe 5 actually. I don't go too far off that cross, about 4 to 5. And then I'll start a new piece of wire right here. Normally we would go in the opposite direction that this is coming out so that the seams meet, but because of the tightness of this coil, it's easier if you just stay in one direction. So I'm going to cut a fresh piece of 28 gauge and I'm going to cut it 3 feet long. And again, to add this wire, normally we would go through this way so that the edge of that broken one and the edge of this starting one meet. But in this little tight little coil like this, it isn't going to matter. I like to weave overhanded, so I'm just going to stay overhanded. Just going to put a 1-inch fragment in there. I'm going to get this fragment out of my way. I'm going to make sure to just hold on to it right there. Push back and just keep going. I don't cut those 2 fragments off until, I make it at least halfway around, just so you're not fighting this little bit traveling on you while you start this new wire. So my next goal is to get to here, between this one and this one. It's right about here, or even that one, split them right about here. When I think I'm close, I'm going to go ahead and make sure that I roll in a little bit to see how close I actually am. And again, just working both hands here to make that turn nice. I'm concerned with being in between this one and this one. That's on the previous coil. So the split is probably right here. Got about 3 or 4 more to do. I started new wire on this run, so I'm going to make sure to push these back nice and tight and make sure that, there's no gap that's too big that happens there. And right about here, maybe one more, I can split them and pass through the previous coil and lock this one in place. So I'll get my secret weapon, my mat pin, and I'll just eyeball going in right about there. I'm going to make sure my fingers are not in the way so I don't stab myself. And I'm just going to work the needle up and down and cause a little bit of space. Get the end of my nice clean wire. Go through there. Pull it as cleanly down as I can. Once I get close, I'll lock into that little space. Scrape the bubble right there. Hold it. Make one wrap to lock it in. And then I'll keep going. My next destination is right here, in between these next 2. Okay, let's just pause right here really quick before we go too far. There's going to be 9 of these coils once the lid is finished. So what I like to do is earmark the top of this tip, and this is 1 coil, 2 coil, 3 coil. The one I'm making is number 4 coil. So just from the tip, 1, 2, 3, and this one's 4. We're going to make 7 of these, and we're just going to keep doing, the tie-ins bricklayer style. I'm not so much concerned with the pattern more than I am to even just getting them tied in between the previous ones so that they stay together. And so I'll work with you through the lid, and then we start the basket, the bottom part of the locket, in the very same way. So we'll work this first. On the 8th pass around, we're going to make the hinge with the remaining length of this 18 gauge. And about 3 times around here, it should start feeling a little easier for you to work and hold on to this entire structure, because there's more to hang on to. It's just at the beginning when it's real little. So right about here, I'll make my turn. I've got a few more to go before I get to here. So. So I might have gone one too many, but that's okay. Push it back. That's pretty good right there. If I am OCD about it, I can always unravel 1 or 2. Okay, so right about there is good. I'll get my little needle. Make a little space right there. Dive in with my wire. Avoid getting caught on my camera. Pull down, push up a little bit. Get it to where it's close. You might have to push your coil back a little bit. And when you feel like you can snap in there, go ahead and do that. And then just continue. My next destination is going to be between this one and this one. So between this one and this one, so right about here, right where this one is. So I'll go to here. You can notice that the coil stretches are getting longer and longer, so eventually we'll split them twice. But for now, we can still go just bricklayer style in between. These are about 1/2 inch. I don't like them to get too much bigger than that because then there's too much motion. So, you know, the more times you tie back, the tighter this whole coil is for this purpose. You know, staying in between them the way we are here is pretty good. After this one, I might start splitting them twice, you know, here, going in between these. So we'll see. You just want to keep it fairly even. It doesn't have to be perfect, but you see how this one turns out? At a glance, it looks pretty good. And then we can put embellishments on top of that too, with little bead balls and such. So keep working until we get to here. And you can also take these two off. To take these off, one's going to come off the top and one's going to come off the bottom. So give it a little tension. Spin the whole thing until it breaks. Come over here. Do the same thing. Give it a little tension and make turns until it breaks. And then just scrape these together. That's pretty good. It looks like nothing happened there. Okay, so we'll keep going. So I'm looking to make it here. So I'll go a little bit more. See, this run is starting to get really long, so I might not, I pre-bend because I like to go no more than 1/2 inch. So I might just break this pattern. There's one here and there's one here. So I'm going to go in between those two instead of coming way over here for this stretch. And then I'll start to break them down after that. So I'll go here and then I'll go here, etc. Okay? So just watch your patterns and look how long these open stretches are because, you know, that's where it can separate, where there's no tie. Okay? So I'm just going to go to about right here and split between this one and this one. So I'll do a couple more. This is what I mean by pull through each time so that it doesn't get into a knot right there. And straighten out the wire. So I'm going to curve, keep my curves as elegant as I can, go a few more. And that's pretty good. So I'm pretty much in between these two. I'm going to split it right here. So let me get my little handy needle. My focus is between this one and this one. Split it right here and being right above my wire. Hook a little needle. Take my wire through it. Get really, really close. Make sure I'm in position. And then go ahead and snap it in. Do a little scrape. Get in line with your bottom coil. Get that in there. And then keep going. So here's about 1/2 inch. That would be another 1/2 inch. I could probably just go to here and do that 1/2 inch and stay on that pattern. You know, I might stop right here just to keep a split between these two. And I think I might do that. I'll just go to right here and split these. You know, there's probably counted patterns for this. You know, certainly in the old ancient basket weaving that they do with this technique, there's beautiful patterns. I'm not so much concerned with patterns more than I am tying my coils together in such a way that they don't separate. But, you know, you could always go back and really count, you know, and do some patterning that's interesting. That's beyond the scope of my tutorial, but I thought I'd mention it in case you were interested in looking up some old Native American, I think, basket weaves. This is called the coil basket. I think it's called a couple of different things, wedding basket, coil baskets. But you'll see the patterns. This has been done for centuries and centuries, maybe longer. Yeah, I'm going to go to here because that keeps the spacing consistent in my wheel here on this round. Give a little pre-turn here. And that's about good. I probably don't even need to split that one there, but. And then we use the needle also at the end just to even out some of these spaces, right, between these coils, between the coils and our spiral. So you see how sometimes it can get off, so I'm just going to place it where it belongs. It's close enough, and then I'm going to snap in there. Then I'll start my next one. So I'll go probably, so here and here are the next two ties. I'll probably split it right about here, right about where that one comes. That's about right, so I'll split it right there. Ouch, I just poked myself in the finger with this needle. Don't do that, that hurts. Woo, keep your bottom finger out of the way when you're doing that. I'm also under the camera, I know you won't do that to yourself, but the hazards of working with that thing. Otherwise, but you need it. Otherwise, this would just be miserable to try to get through these coils. So I'm going to get into place. And I'm going to snap in and pull tight. Just make sure the spaces don't get bigger and bigger. You're working to keep that little spacing consistent as you grow your coil. And I've got 1, 2, 3, 4. This is my 5th time around. Once I get up to here. And for this one, I think I'm going to work to split them between here and here. So I'll get to right about here. You can do yours as you like. Split them more or a little bit less. You know, if you split them less and make these too long, then like I said, the whole thing has a tendency to fall apart. So at least do it bricklayer style. You can certainly just count patterns and wrap it every 12 or and every 13 or whatever, and work that whole pattern around the spiral as well. For me, the counting becomes a little bit too much, so I just look for logical, neat spaces. Probably going to go to about right there, because that's about even between here and here, right about here. It's right about here. Keep my finger out of the way this time. Just split it right about here. I'm going to turn the wire a little bit more so that I'm not fighting that curve to stay. Probably need to do a couple more. I'm not quite straight underneath there. If you're not quite straight, it just gives a little slant, like that one's a little bit slanted. That's okay. It's not a big deal, but, or you do it deliberately to all of them and make slanted ties. You know, like I said, there's patterns and stuff that you can develop. My goal is to show you how the technique works to make something pretty but not stressful. Okay, so that's pretty good there. Gonna make sure there's a little bit of space right there so that I can come back through. That's what I mean by don't get too tight. I'm almost at the end of my second 3 feet. This is really small weaving wire, so it's okay if you just waste a couple of inches for the sake of the comfort of your hands. Ooh, but I'm going to go ahead and get new wire. And right about now, too, it's a good time to take a break for your hands. We've been holding on to all of this, so you want to love on your hands a little bit, stretch everything out, stretch your neck out, stretch your back out. Make sure you're taking care of body and mind. And check your fingers. If you feel blisters developing, then that's the place where you put some more of the little bandages or the tapes. Okay, so let's come back after I cut another 3 feet of 28 gauge weaving wire, and we'll start again. Hey, welcome back. Okay, so I stretched out my hands, I gave myself a little break, and we were right here. I went ahead and wrapped into the previous coil with the little bit that I have left. I've got my fresh 3 feet right here ready to go, and I'll just make a couple of wraps to get myself anchored at this end, and then I'll go ahead and start my fresh one, my fresh 3 feet, by just inserting right here, hold both ends, and continue to wrap my coil. So my next destination, since I split this one and this one by right here, is between this one and this one. So I'm going to go right to here, and then I'll hook in again. So I don't know if you recognize, but today is the harvest moon, the harvest full moon. And so what we're making, yes, we've been calling it a locket, but it is a vessel, a little basket that you're weaving so that you can harvest all of your dreams. You can put whatever you want inside the basket, wear it with you, your favorite crystals, your magic tree of life amulet, your picture of your children, or a combination of a few of those things. So these can be very special. And while I can't say that I planned it exactly, it is working out exactly right that I'm going to give this tutorial to you today on the full harvest moon. With your tree of life for this month as well. There'll be a little surprise about that. But first, I want to give you the basket, the harvest moon basket. Okay, so I'll keep going, and I'll just keep these two fragments here until I'm ready to break them off. So I went off camera to weave a little bit farther, and I'm almost to my next destination right here. But let's look and see where on this wheel we are. So remember we said to earmark the tip, the point where we started, and I've got counting down 1 coil, 2 coils, 3 coils, 4 coils. If I count to the right, I have 4 coils. If I count up top, I have 4 coils. And if I count to the left, I have 4 coils, which means that what I've started here is my 5th round around the wheel. And I always just earmark this cut tip as the starting point or the beginning of the weave. Okay, so our goal is to get 7 times around this wheel so that all 4 sides have 7 by the time you get to here, and you will be starting your 8th. Okay, so let's work towards that. I'm going to connect here. I'm going to connect here. I'm going to connect here. I'm going to connect here, and etc. And then going in between again. Okay, like a bricklayer. So I'll work mine a little bit, and I'll let you work yours. And remember to check where you are on the wheel. So here I've started 5, and I've gone a little bit into round number 5. I'm going to continue to work under the camera, but I'm probably going to speed it up just for time's sake, since you have the basic concept now. And you can slow the video down using your little controls down here in the right hand corner, your video controls. So you can slow it down if you want to. I won't speed it up too much, but I'll go about 4 times. And what I'm going to do is probably work 2 more times around this wheel and then slow it down for the last one to give us 7